Alberton.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to follow the right honourable gentleman, and he and I, over the years, have had some knockabout on certain issues, and he has created in this debate the festive spirit. So I want to start, Mr Deputy Speaker, by wishing you and all the staff of Parliament a Merry Christmas and a prosperous 2017. I'm not going to talk about darkest Peru, but brightest Anglesey in my speech as I proceed. And I'm going to talk about not the 95% that is always talked about, but the 5% that's left behind. The 5% who are not expected to get super fast broadband in the initial rollout. This 5% is normally the ones without gas mains. This 5% will struggle to get a mobile signal of 3G, let alone 4G, and talk of 5G. The 5% who won't, as a consequence of having poor mobile signals, get smart meters when they're rolled out because they require that mobile signal. These are the forgotten 5%, and it doesn't have to be like this. The major projects start by promising a 95% threshold. Mr Deputy Speaker, I think we should be talking about 100%. And then, if it's difficulty, let's deal with those areas, rather than allowing this threshold of 95% every time there's major projects and major rollouts. It's time to be more inclusive and time to be more universal. So let's talk about those 100%. The 5% that I'm talking about actually pay more for their heating and other utilities. And they pay, and I think this is an important point, they pay exactly the same as anybody who gets full 4G coverage, gets full super-fast broadband. They pay exactly the same, and they should be treated the same, in my humble opinion. And these people often are in periphery and rural areas. My constituency, Mr Deputy Speaker, is on the periphery of Wales. It's predominantly rural. And people, yes, choose to live there. People choose to visit it. People choose to move into the area, and they're very welcome in North West Wales and Anglesey, as you know, Mr Deputy Speaker, as a regular visitor. But I'm sure you have difficulty in the coastal area of Anglesey in picking up broadband and picking up a mobile signal. And I have been arguing that in the 21st century we should have 21st century technology across the United Kingdom. And I'm going to divert somewhat from this consensual after the last member and remind him, as my honourable friend from Wrexham did, about the previous Labour government's promise to deliver universal service obligation by 2012. And I recall at the time when this government, or the coalition government, came in 2010, arguing for this and being told, A, it wasn't ambitious enough, secondly, it wasn't possible. Then all of a sudden, last year, I think it was about this time last year, the former Prime Minister, David Cameron, stood up and said, I don't think he even consulted with the Minister at the time, that we're going to have universal service obligation by 2020. A complete U-turn, which I very much welcome. It wasn't a... Yes, of course, I'm sure they had private...
Labour promised 100% coverage of 2 megabits. They did not propose a universal service obligation. A universal service obligation allows someone who doesn't have broadband to demand it. When the Prime Minister announced it, he had indeed consulted with ministers.
The honourable gentleman is leading with his chin there, because if he checks Hansard, he will have said the opposite on many occasions. He will have said it's not possible. He will have said that they're not going to deliver it. And all of a sudden, it's not just their ambition, it's actually their flagship policy. So they've turned, and I welcome that, but I want to see that flagship policy come in as soon as possible. I had a recent meeting, of several meetings, with service providers, with BT Openreach, with local constituents and local businesses who are finding it very difficult to operate because of the poor broadband coverage. And the CEO of BT Openreach has agreed to visit my constituency to see the problems and the challenges. And, Mr Deputy Speaker, I've been out with engineers, and I do understand the topography and some of the issues that they have to deal with. But I don't accept in the 21st century that we can put a man on the moon, that I can talk to my daughter in Melbourne, Australia, that many... Sorry, the Minister wants to intervene? No, I'm quite happy for him to do it. But we can't get a decent signal. And in rural periphery areas like the Faroe Islands, you can get 100% broadband coverage. Because I believe if there is a political will, then it's technically possible to do it. And that's why I'm at one with the new Minister, the Right Honourable Gentleman, when he brought in his digital economy bill. I'm 100% with him. But I do have a few questions for him. And he's been blown up as this great successor to the previous minister, and he has a real challenge on his hands to live up to his reputation. But I want him to go further, and I want him to tell this House how the rollout of universal broadband is actually going to work, because all we hear is words at this moment in time. Who is Ofcom going to ask to roll this out? Are we going to go to the market forces that have failed many areas of the United Kingdom thus far when it comes to mobile? I have dozens of mobile operators phoning up and saying, do you want a connection? And when I tell them where I live, they're unable to do it. So the market isn't a magic solution at all. So I want to know from the digital bill what legislation is going to come in secondary legislation to deliver this, because I think it is important. And I do welcome the digital economy bill, and I think it does lift our status as a country in moving forward in the digital age. But how does it work in practice? And I want to offer the new Minister for the Digital Economy an offer that I gave the previous one. And that is for my constituency on the periphery, rural, semi-rural and urban, to be a pilot scheme for the new universal service obligation. I'm sure working with private companies, with the Welsh Government, we can deliver full coverage, because at the moment we only have 79.9% of super-fast broadband, and we have 14%. Well, I'll check the figures because I've wrote them down here, and I don't want to get it wrong because the Minister's bound to have his book in front of him there. Ultra-fast broadband is just 6.4%, and 14.5% are below the speeds that we now call super-fast broadband. So I think there's a challenge there for the country, and for the country as a whole, but in my constituency. And I'll finish on this because I know there are other members that want to speak. I support the universal service obligation. I support this government's intention to have it for 2020. And I know the Minister is a decent person. And I will say to him to give a gift to the people of Ynys the Isle of Anglesey today, and say, yes, we will look at having the Isle of Anglesey as a pilot scheme for the future. And I will work with him and his government to get USO on Anglesey and across the United Kingdom.